Good afternoon. Thanks everyone for joining us today. And we're very pleased to have Nick join us again, as this is his second webinar that he's run with us. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands we are all zooming from today, from across WA and Australia, and pay our respects to the cultural elders of the past, present and emerging, and acknowledge their spiritual connection to country. Today I sit here in Wajak land, where it is the season of Makaroo. This season we saw the coming of the first rains, and which allowed for free movement across the land to hunt for red meat animals for the use in food and clothing to help ward off the cold. RegenWA believes in regenerating our regional landscapes and communities. We focus on supporting farmers who are investigating alternative production practices with the aim of minimising or reversing the impact of productivity constraints like climate change and soil acidity. With the interruption to our farmer field days, we've turned to providing these webinars, which provide an opportunity to hear from other like-minded farmers and practitioners about how and why we transition to more regenerative farming practices. This is the second webinar with Nick, with more to come. His first session was about defining regenerative agriculture, and this has now been made available on our website. And then Nick will also be back on the 9th of July to share more ways about how to take this leap. So prior to that, we'll also have Nick Kelly joining us next Thursday, and he'll provide us with a bit of a case study on his place down in Newdigate and how he manages his regenerative farming operation. Then for those who are interested in learning more about carbon, Kent Broad will be with us on the 25th for Carbon 101. And details of these webinars are up on our website, as well as the recordings from our past webinars with Nick and Nicole. So before we begin, a quick outline of how the webinar will work. As you'll notice, everyone is on mute, which is great for reducing the background noise. So can you please make sure you stay on mute for as long as the webinar goes for, unless otherwise asked. Also, if you could turn your videos off, so that helps reduce the bandwidth for those in the more regional areas. So on to Nick. Nick has a wealth of knowledge about agriculture and livestock management. He's travelled across Australia and abroad as a stock handler. He now resides in the Adelaide Hills after having a much larger cropping and livestock farm, where he and his family went on a journey to develop an ecosystem grounded in biological diversity. Nick is a trainer, coach and senior consultant with RCS. And now I'll hand over to Nick. I think everyone's in, which is really good, and we'll pull the questions for afterwards. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Shay. It's really good of you to invite me along. And by way of reintroduction for the folks that weren't here the other day, I was born and raised in some overrated black sand farm near Mount Gambier in the southeast of South Australia. And we grew beef and lamb and potatoes in that country. In 1982, I took off jackarooing to New South Wales, sheep station, and then Queensland cattle station, and then I went on live sheep and cattle and goat carriers out of Western Australia, which ultimately took me to Kojonup. So I learned about some more good country there. I had a year in the Pilbara bull catching and doing some other really stupid things the hard way. And then I went home to settle about 10 years after I'd left school. My family there, they were really, really traditional rescue remedy farmers, and anything off label was pretty much considered heresy. So we had to be a bit careful about how we went about it. And we were totally immersed in that good old fashioned traditional way for the first 5 or 6 years of our married life. And in 99, my wife, Alexi, who herself was a high-fert agronomist, we began our transformation to bring soils on our farm back to life through doing initially an RCS Grazing for Profit school. Ironically, I should be lucky enough now to be on the other side of the desk working for RCS. But I didn't realise the wild ride that lay ahead. And it all started really from taking that first jump. So the first jump, I think, looks like this. It's a letter to yourself. And mine went like this. It went, "Dear Nick, I want to get off the gear. I feel as if I'm addicted. Every time I go into the crop, I see things that need killing. Weeds, insects, snails, fungus. Why me? Why do I spend all this money trying to kill things that want to live here? Why do they want to eat my crop? could leaving a few weeds be okay? And as for the sheep, how do they get through millions of years of evolution to just want to die of fly strike and worms on my place? If I never dagged another sheep again, it would be too soon. Have you got any answers? I've heard about this regen stuff, but it's just a bit too weird and different to talk about out loud with anyone I know. I'm hoping you can help me. Regards, Dad. So you have to ask yourself, maybe you're happy already. Maybe if what you do currently feels right and it feels like you do it for the next 100 years and always be improving your land and your life and your animals and your business, well, I'd suggest don't go changing. You'll know if you are like that because you'll never have asked yourself the questions in that letter, and you'll be beholden to no one. You'll be in complete control of your costs. So you'll be understanding how your soils and your plants function, and they'll be naturally all at one with your animals. It'll be like they're talking to you. And you'll know if you're happy and content because you understand what it is that you're working with. See, we only fear what we don't understand. And see, when we suffer from fear, we seek to offset that suffering in one of two ways. We either get support from drugs or chemicals, or we can come to terms with it and understand the problem. So choosing a pathway of regeneration, it puts us on a learning curve that goes in the opposite direction to drugs. And it was which farming inputs that cause harm to soils and biology and plants and animals which become dependent are no longer. So we steer away from this harm towards health, and we want to understand what harm we've caused in the first place and what health it is that we're really looking for in our farming ecosystems. And when we're healthy, I think we're really truly happy. So therefore, maybe we need to seek to understand. A training course of some kind will provide many answers, but can also raise even more questions. That's the paradox of learning. It's the shift from not knowing what we don't know, which is called unconscious incompetence, to now knowing what we don't know. There's conscious incompetence. And that's possibly the most uncomfortable position to be in. It's uncomfortable for a few reasons. Firstly, we need to accept that what we've been doing is possibly not working, possibly. And we need to accept that we are part of and not the master of our ecosystem. And this requires letting go of our comfort zone and to go exploring into the unknown. We also have to let go of our ego because that's what's keeping us feeling dominant over nature. And it's only when we let ourselves merge into the scenery and the environment and be a nondescript part of the food chain that we truly see the things that we need to understand. So it's also uncomfortable because mentally we have to use a side of our brain, the right side of our brain, that's responsible for creativity and for colour. And for many of us, that feels as unco as throwing a ball with the opposite hand. We've been comfortable to date using mostly the left side, which is responsible for maths and science and logic, that kind of thing. So this new muscle use feels weird. And maybe it's just a bit too hard to practice. So why don't we go check out some farms that are open for inspection? Here's how it goes. You see a farm walk advertised and you think, I'm going to go and hear this fella and his wife talk and see how weird they really are. They won't change me, but I just want to see if what everyone says is true. That's cool. At least you're off your comfy dunghill. And you go along to the field walk and you look at all the other weirdos there. You immediately recognize a neighbour you wouldn't have picked as being interested in this stuff. And thank goodness you think to yourself, I won't tell if she doesn't. But something different happens at this farm walk and on this farm that we're walking across. You notice that the owners are actually quite normal. And their farm looks good. It's though not how you'd run your own, But hey, each to their own, you forgive them for that. And then they drop this bombshell, say, nah, we aren't organic, mate. We just want to look after our soil better. That's what got us started. And hell, you think, doesn't everybody? And after you heard that, you stop listening to anything else. So you get home, and that night at dinner, your wife says to you, so what'd you see at the farm walk? And you tell her that surprisingly, they haven't gone all hippie and organic, and that really it looked quite normal and pretty simple too. But they said that they don't set stock their sheep anymore. Well, that's not so hard to get your head around. They said their sheep no longer get daggy. Well, that must be a lie. And they plant seed on their stubble straight after harvest to grow over the summer. And that's very hard to get your head around. And they swap out urea for other kinds of nitrogen that don't damage their soil carbon. You didn't know that that was even important. And they're still making a good profit per hectare, they say. You'd like to know how they work that out. And so on and so forth it goes. And then your wife, knowingly, she sits down with that empathetic look and says, you know, Dale, what do you love doing? You know, give us the big picture, you know? And that's where it takes hold. You know you need a big picture. And she has hit that old vision nail right on the head. You see, you need to be drawn powerfully towards something. Many years ago, I learned from some Zimbabwean farmers who migrated to Australia that in order to be content and happy, you need to be drawn towards something and not pushed away from it. Like in that photograph there, you need to look out on the fertile plains rather than the near ground of the rocky slopes. Until these Zimbabwean farmers embraced their new life and their family situation, they stopped lamenting what Robert Mugabe had taken away from them. They could never move forward. So in farming, if we're drawn powerfully towards methods that work with Mother Nature rather than fighting against her, we can find it comfortable and even pleasurable to embrace biological farming. But when we hold a vision for our farm that has life and abundance and soil and growth as its core values, we get clear on where we're going and how we're going to get there. The difference is that we're not so much repulsed by the chemicals and the poisons that we've used in our soils and our plants and animals up to this point. We aren't trying to get away from them, though it would be good if we could for the whole microbial toxicity thing. Rather, we're subconsciously stating a new set of vows to our farm ecosystem that says, I promise to make you healthy again. And in that photo, that's a little chip of Western Australia that broke away a long time ago and became Kangaroo Island. And that's some fire ground that was all burnt. It was all black. The near ground has responded. It's 5 months later, and there's a new cover of fresh cape wheat across there. And in the distance, you can see the coastal scrub still blackened all the way to the seaweed on the beach. So in that, the carbon is at the center of the ecosystem like this. It's in the atmosphere, in the forest, in the ocean, in way too high levels in the ocean, mind you. And the soils, and there's not enough in the soils. And we also burn a lot of it to power the planet. And it's in this cycle of ebb and flow. And most of our soils now have way less of it, shallow and deep, than what they had in them when the first Europeans landed in 1788. You know, historically, we're learning much of late through incredibly insightful research, like with people like Bruce Pascoe and Dark Emu, and that Indigenous farming methods might have acknowledged soil carbon accumulation way more than the fire stick farmers were ever given credit for. So carbon's a very good place to start when we're addressing some health corrections on our farm. You can see their burnt country again on Kangaroo Island, and 5 months later, those plants in the foreground are all that have come back. There is so much scarring of burning, and that would burn so hot that is all that is growing in that near area. In an ideal world, we'd have a composting facility on our boundary and a government subsidy that gets 5 tonnes to the hectare of compost spread on all of our land for the next 10 years. This would be a great way to kickstart the soil carbon cycle and fire up the underground microbiology. The return of our city's organic waste never had such a warranted destination. Unfortunately, we most likely have neither. So we need to look for an alternative to reach the same goal. See, Newton stated that energy is not lost or destroyed, it's merely transferred. And thus we need to import a small, affordable carbon energy starter culture of live microbes and grow them out in our soil. So we use their energy to transfer into even more carbon energy using the magic of photosynthesis of plants, upon which the live microbes in a soil are dependent for food. And this is the process we have to understand and then multiply. Many Australian sandy soils have little ability to hold nutrients by virtue of their original makeup. It's a bit like the body that your parents' genes gave you. Just like bodybuilding, there's an ability to adjust this upwards by doing whatever we can to improve plant root growth. You see in that deep scar that's been carved there, in a photo of Gabe Brown's, it's pretty deep limestone with just a very, very wafer thin layer of soil built on top of it. And we just have to keep doing more of that. That is our eternal mission, to keep growing and lifting our altitude over time. We have to promote the plant root growth, and we have to be devoted to the plant roots in order to supply perennial food to the underground microbes. As they live and die and transform to become humus, they change the nutrient holding capacity of the soil to up to 5 times their own weight in water and nutrient. That's up to 30 times more than clay. So aiming for greater than 2% soil organic carbon, at least 2%, should be every farmer's goal. That's humus being created in a pile called compost, and it's still cooking. It's still quite warm in the center. It's not finished yet. So we'll talk a bit about good compost later. So to begin with, here's a big tip. Choose one paddock, just one paddock. It may be the driveway paddock that you see every day. It may not be the road paddock that everyone else can see, or maybe it is and you just want to show off, like this one here. This is a guy's first attempt at growing a multi-species cover crop, and the cows are meant to be in there, yes. So think what good gardening looks like. Often it involves composting and turning things into soil. It involves aeration and flocculation. And tillage in the paddock is less and less practiced these days, but like in the garden, it may be occasionally required to set the scene up for future success. Incorporating nutrients and minerals can be done through foliar application, soil drenches, or mechanical ripping. Your soil's first requirement, though, is oxygen. And if you have trouble treading a shovel into the soil, you'll probably need to speed the process up by mechanical aeration or ripping. This is accepted good practice so long as you ensure that you have some roots planned to grow into the space that you're creating to keep it open. Otherwise, you'll just waste your diesel and money, and very soon you'll end up right back where you started from. Then talk to your soils and plants, but don't get caught. Moreover, listen to them and observe them and reason with them. And if the plants could talk, what would they say? Those tiny little seedlings in a furrow there have got something to tell you. It might go like this. I have a primary function to capture sunlight and inject it through my roots down into soil to feed my microbial mates. Everything else is secondary. I need a warm, moist bed that can hold onto and be ready to serve me a complete menu of nutrition. I need to have my roots surrounded by billions of diverse bacteria, fungi, nematodes, and protozoa and other little creatures to bring this nutrition to me. I need you to love and respect the other plants around me, even if they don't provide you with a direct economic return. I need you to be very excited by my healthy photosynthesizing leaves. I need you to be even more excited about my root development. And if you graze me, that's okay. But I'm going to need some rest and time to regrow without more grazing pressure. If you apply a poison that is meant to kill my competitor, remember it gives me at best a fair guts ache as well. I need you to keep my sugar levels up through good husbandry so that I don't become a takeover target for insects. I need a good suit of armour covering me in the form of defensive microbes to fend off the offensive ones. You see, all those questions there are just good gardening, really. And if we talk to our animals, why don't we talk to our soils? On the subject of animals, if they could talk, what would they say about your style of farming? Are you biologically in sync with them? And would they naturally like to cycle and ovulate at the time that you're expecting them to? Would they like to eat more than the 3 species of food that you're offering them? Are they gaining weight at their optimum performance? Would they ask for energy, maybe when you're feeding them protein, and vice versa? Is your stock water a good nutrient, a good source of minerals and health, as well as just being a thirst slaker? Would they look forward to being pushed into the yards for yet another treatment? Or would they resist you? Could all of your stock work be done with a 60 minutes camera over your shoulder? Now there's a thought. And do you understand that they will become food someday? We generally pride ourselves on our stockmanship and take deep offence to those who accuse us of mishandling our livestock. These must be the luckiest chooks in the world, talking about other kinds of livestock, but it's a fairly widely digested food, eggs and chicken meat. So if you can be as lucky as Paul Righetti's fortunate chooks to live out a wonderful life whilst on this planet, it doesn't get a lot better than that for animals. So part of regenerative practice is to scrutinise our own actions and improve them where we can, so that our animals can have an incredible life whilst on this earth. So then we ask ourselves, can we handle the background noise? Are we too nervous to go any further? Much of the background noise that we hear when we're embarking on a regen program is the little voice of doubt and fear inside our own head. So if we're entering this Lake Mulwala right now down the boat ramp, it will be fairly evident it's not a good idea to try go boating on it right there. But if we can change the level of the lake or leave it alone for a little while and come back later, we might find that something has changed to make it possible. So when we're taking advice from an agronomist backed by a large multinational corporation, and don't get me wrong, they're very nice people. They also hand out farming awards to growers who use a lot of their product, and we defer to their judgment. When we move away from convention and we explore new ways and methods, we become often nervous and you can feel a bit isolated. Much of this is self-imposed because underneath it all is what we've done in the past to probably some other pioneers. Therefore, we need to think about apologising physically or face-to-face, or at the very least subconsciously, to some of those other daring explorers in agriculture who've chosen to do no harm to their soils using alternative methods. Who are we to judge a colleague's reasons or requirements, especially when they're fulfilling their goals of working with Mother Nature? I mean, after all, how often has she been wrong? So what's extremely useful is to seek out your own form of background noise. It becomes more like music to your ears that supports and encourages you to try new methods and work and think to your potential, challenge your assumptions and provide innovative ideas. This looks like a person who has embarked on the same journey and who has overcome the same negative talk and self-doubt you're going through at the moment. Some people call them mentors. I call them really handy people. And there's also a very important component, getting your partner's support. If you have your partner in farming support, you're already in a great spot. Their encouragement for you to fulfill your goals and visions, as well as possibly their own, will be the energy to keep you going and growing when you feel like you're second guessing yourself. There's nothing harder than swimming against the rip. And yet if you drift to one side and you take a new angle of attack, you'll vastly improve your chances of survival. So similarly, fighting against dad's disapproval or big brother's dogmatism of your biological farming wacky ideas is sooner or later going to be soul destroying. Looking for all of the small wins and building on them without highlighting them to anyone else is essential. And guaranteed in time, they will be ultimately thinking that you are the new normal and that all of these new and quite interesting methods are the way of everyone's future. And if they don't, and you stand to lose your spot on the farm, there comes a time when you'll ask yourself what's important. If farming biologically is more important to you than farming with soil harmful products and methods, there are points of negotiation. Then keep the lines of communication open and keep your possibilities of action by demonstration alive. Don't make dad or big brother wrong for what they're doing. Investigate how you can change the way you go about your own farming adjustments so that ultimately you're succeeding in getting their attention for all the right reasons. Thanks for having me today.
Thanks, Nick. I think that was a great little chat. And you had obviously some really good points and everything in there. And there was a question that did pop up on the side, but if you do have questions, make sure you put them into the chat box. I will start with some of the questions that were sent through prior to the session when you registered through your try booking. So, so some people started with their questions with how do sheep and cropping integrate?
Livestock are almost imperative in a regenerative cropping system. And yet I've seen in the likes of Winnipeg in Canada, where they have 120 frost-free days a year. So 240 days of frosty or colder than that. It's too hard to run livestock. They have to barn them for so long that it's just too hard. So the lecture that I got from my mentor there was he used soil biology as his livestock, and he used them to lift his altitude 1 centimetre a year. And he took us out there with a backhoe and he showed us 18 new centimetres of soil for 18 years of farming that way. And there's some ways I'll share with you next time about the actual methodology of how he did that. Livestock in a rotational system in Australia is much easier than that. And if we can keep our livestock going around in more dense mobs so that we're supporting also a population of dung beetles and insects that follow them around, that take that dung down into the soil and not just lay it on top, that we use our animals like a bit of a roller and eat and flatten, use hoof and tooth to lay some stems on the ground so that we get a thatching effect. Most of those stems will never become soil carbon. Most of them will volatilize back into the atmosphere. They either can do it standing up or lying down. Standing up, they don't do much good for the soil. Laying down, they do a lot of good in the thatching and blanket effect that they give your soil. And then livestock stimulate a lot of summer plant growth, and they can control summer plant growth too if you use them like a landscaping tool. So set stocking livestock is not much good to anybody. If you just want to set stock livestock, then this probably won't be for you. If you're up for rotationally grazing and really managing with livestock as an integral part It's wonderful.
Another one that came through during the session was, where is the balance point between improving soils and still getting water runoff onto the farm, into the farm dams?
We've become very reliant on runoff for farm dams. If you listen to Peter Andrews' talks, you'll learn that soils in Australia used to have lots of water running through them and not so much water running over them. All of the burrowing marsupials that plagued Australia when the early explorers wrote their journals and plagued their lives as well, and ate the hair out of their saddles and made life pretty hard. And they got into houses and they couldn't wait for cats and foxes to come along to eradicate the little suckers. What they did such a beautiful job of was aerated the soil, whether it be in the desert or in less arid country than that. Your bettongs and bilbies and nail tails and all those stick nest rats and all those beautiful creatures, there were billions of them having the soil really porous. And dams didn't fill so well in those early times until those creatures disappeared. Rabbits used to make a heck of an impact on water catchments because water ran into their warrens. So you see we're at a bit of a loggerhead here with water runoff. But if we can maintain our soil moisture levels, we get far less evaporation. So water is held in there. It takes very little to then top the soil up and then get runoff. It's the first time that we need to fill the soils to their potential and then get runoff as well. But I would suggest that if you have a dam that fills naturally very well, fence it off, protect it, don't have any stock admitted to it at all, and pump water from there and use it as a reservoir. And I think if our water can be more sacred than it currently is, we will have better quality water as well.
Yes, I suppose having some like graded catchments or a chain of pools helps capture that water instead of it rushing off down your landscape, and then it helps to go back through the soils, and then so that's sort of what you're looking for, isn't it, Nick?
Certainly. I also have a little problem with in catchments that are, possibly have too many dams in them, and those dams are often evaporation ponds. Now that wouldn't be anyone on this call, but I do see it elsewhere. Is that dams are just smelly little evaporation ponds that ought to be amalgamated into one decent sized reservoir and then pumped from there. There's a bit more infrastructure, but it's much more reliable in the end.
Yeah. Another question that came through was, what type of soil and plant monitoring other than soil tests should we start with? I suppose it's like a bit of a baseline.
Use a penetrometer or just a piece of 8mm rod made into a T-bar that you push into the ground by hand and basically using your fingers. And if you can't get it much further than 100 mils into the ground, you need to be able to get some air, some more oxygen into that soil by way of either deep-rooted perennials or a little ripping or aerating using mechanics. But the first testing tool that I would buy would be a penetrometer and a refractometer to play around measuring your bricks, measure the bricks of your food, measure the bricks of your grass, measure the bricks of your crop, play with it and get to know it and understand it. And there's some good explanations in Nicole Masters' book on how to play with that and how to use one. Then soil tests, soil tests don't change much year on year. Plant tissue tests on the same transect that you took a soil test are really interesting. If you take a plant tissue test of your beneficial plants on the same transect, put them side by side, sometimes it's difficult to believe that they came out of the same paddock because what's available and what's there in the store are two totally different things. So I sometimes think that soil tests can be a little bit overrated, and I'll probably cop a lot of flack for saying that, but you can help yourself greatly by measuring the plant tissue analysis and seeing what you have got available.
Yeah. So is there a minimum debt or equity ratio that you've found with clients that enables them to transition? And would you recommend changing the whole farm over or just a couple of paddocks?
One paddock to start with. Just choose your favourite paddock. You want it to be good anyway, so you'll make this work. Choose one that you look at most days. As I said, probably the driveway. And is there a minimum equity? Yeah. Look, I think that if you are if you're in low equity levels at the moment, you need to change your equity separately from doing all this. So this should not drop your equity at all. However, if you're going into unknown territory, not knowing what you're doing, and unprepared and unrehearsed, then you're probably going to have a disaster. Might as well, keep doing what you're doing. Economically, this makes a lot of sense because you become less reliant on a top-heavy cost structure and less reliant on some direct costs that have become ingrained. You can start to chop them out, and you chop out some overheads as well. You want me to put a figure on it? I love seeing businesses that have 75 to 80% equity or higher. When they get lower than 65%, I really think we need to do something about it. In these low interest times, it's pretty good. It's affordable because it's not the equity for most farmers that's the issue. It's servicing the loan that's the issue. So we need to generate enough cash out of the business to service the loan. If your business could do a hypothetical and run these figures back out to 7, 8, 10% interest rates, and it won't be covered, then change what you're doing.
You mentioned different sources of nitrogen that are kinder on the soil carbon. What can you elaborate on this?
Yeah. For a start, urea has an amazingly good impact at turning carbon back into CO2 and sticking it back up in the atmosphere, which we're trying to take it out of. So 1 kilo of urea can volatilize 100 kilos of carbon. That's why it's really good for breaking down stubbles. So what we've got to do is lower our urea levels and preferably work with ammoniac form of nitrogen rather than a nitrate form of nitrogen. So if we must use urea, lower the rates, lower it down to 20 or 30 kilos and always put it out with a carbon source. So make sure you've got some humate to go out with it. Humate's for humus, as Nicole said. And we also can find some really good, there's some good proprietary products. You need to get onto your biological agronomist that will point you in a direction of whatever's good for you in your regional area. People are using Blue N and such like over there. And I'm not an agronomist. I've just paid an agronomist a small fortune to make things work for me or not, and I've wasted a fortune, and I haven't made a fortune. I made enough just to keep out of trouble, but mine by very nature, and also having my wife as my backup as my agronomist is very helpful. But she also wanted to get off what we were on. We realised it wasn't doing our soils any good at all. So nitrogen wasn't our limiting factor once we got our soil carbon, organic carbon, up over 4%. You won't need any nitrogen once you're up over 4% because the microbes are doing it all for you.
That sounds handy. Get the microbes doing the work for us.
Well, they're really perfectly capable of doing that and getting them back in balance and restoring particularly your N-fixing bacteria down there, which we've been pretty good at removing, and because urea is so cheap, we're sort of like not worried about it. Urea is, and that's the true drug of choice. That's just like speed for your plants. Now, yeah, they'll operate on speed, but one day when they come off it and come down off it, it's a big crash. And this is the crash that we often see in our systems, and particularly low carbon systems. And you know, there's so much that we haven't done with legumes, and so much that we haven't done in big areas with fixing bacteria that yet I've seen work really well on medium-sized plants.
There was a question that came through. So what is the one thing you would recommend to a farmer wanting to make the transition from conventional to regenerative practices?
Believe that it's already been done. People have already done it. Oh, we started in 1999, and I hadn't really heard of. I could not find anybody in Australia that had grown an organic potato commercially. No, I could. I wasn't sure. In fact, I was pretty sure they weren't making money. So that deterred me greatly. But once I started to find people who were doing this already, and was brave enough to go and ask them, hey, how do you do that? They're so happy to be asked. They shared so much, it was ridiculous. And they so wanted me to succeed. And then we had so much training available to us. Maybe we spent too much time. We were told we spent too much time at training and not enough time in the paddock. But I was determined that I wanted to get the knowledge right before we took it into the paddock. And also, you know, Dad ran a conventional farm, so he needed convincing that this was going to work. So we had to go and get twice the amount of knowledge that we had, at least, to have him half as comfortable with us getting back out in the paddock there and making these changes. And we did it with potatoes, we did it with cereals. I particularly had a great relationship with milling oats, sending them to Dubbo for a stone milling company up there, and it worked really well. But I must say that because we kind of didn't know a heck of a lot and maybe got that timing a bit wrong. Now you don't have to do that because all the knowledge is there, and the mentoring, the reading. You can read everything that you want. It's all there 20 years later.
So how did you measure your organic carbon?
That'd be the soil test, which is, I use the same, the Brookside soil test all the time, or like Albrecht soil test. Choose a type and stick to it. And I would go with your agronomist's recommendation. Find an agronomist that you like, that has the same values, shares the same values you do, and then go with and stick with the same thing. How we measured it, I'll tell you what, we started mighty low. We started at in one paddock, 0.5%, a bit less actually. We won a stupid award for it, like the Beach Sand Award. And in our black sands of Mount Gambier, we thought that we should be better than that. We always thought we should be better than what we were. So yeah, we got that paddock in 10 years. We got that to a bit over 4%.
So legumes are really important in any sort of a system, or is it just like depends on what you're cropping?
Legumes are really important in a rotation because they have a whole raft of species of biology that live off the rhizomes of legumes, and to have them in the rotation is really important. In the end, I just had lucerne as a base because it worked for me. Lucerne as a base to everything, and we didn't have to spray lucerne out because it's going dormant. Summer active lucerne's going dormant in the autumn as we would sow a cereal straight into it, and the cereal just bolted away because of the nitrogen there available to it. So it seemed like a perfect partnership. And if you look at the companions and the partnerships that are available to you, just read and read and read, you'll find them. You can find, particularly where, I know that Western Australia has a long dry summer, but I have seen some what was called failed summer crops, 30% germination, and the results in the subsequent crop to what was in inverted commas a failed summer multi-species cover crop, the results lifted production by a minimum of 20% in the following year.
You showed me a picture before, and I'll bring it up, but I just wanted to, I think this was the question that Nate reflected on. So by keeping cover through the year, assuming summer crops after a grain or pulse winter crop, do you suffer a yield penalty because of lost soil profile moisture at the start of the growing season? This seems to be the strongest argument against regularly using summer crops in the wheat belt unless purely opportunistic after a summer storm event.
I love this question because when you really get down there on hands and knees in March, April, May, before the winter rains have come, and dig around and look for moisture in the soil after a dry summer, it's probably deep. In non-wetting sands, it's probably deep because it didn't percolate in anyway, and most of it evaporates. The bigger issue than whether you've got stored moisture is the viney plants on top that machinery doesn't like going through. And that's another issue altogether, whether we use disc or tines or whatever. But when you look at the value of live roots all the way through summer, and basically you've got bare soil, nature hates that. Nature's saying, I'd really like to put a scab on that soil. So nature doesn't care. It puts any old plant on there it can, one that preferably grows really quickly and spreads flat. Unfortunately, lots of farmers don't like those for a number of reasons. And I don't like cat heads and double Gs either, walking across them or letting them go. But here, when they're young plants and we have a really nice big mob of sheep go in there in good density, they take most of them out anyway. And short graze, long rest, and another short graze and long rest, you can control them so much better than killing the leaf on top. And then what that does, well, when you spray out the leaf on top, you kill off that which supports the microbes underneath. And the microbes underneath are actually making you that humus and that soil carbon to hang on to the moisture. Sand won't hang on to moisture. Sand is often repellent of moisture. It's the microbes creating the humus that holds on to moisture. Like I said, it can hang on to 30 times more than clay.
Yeah. So in transitioning to regen ag practices, where do you see more support is needed? Through social support networks or technical advice?
I think there's plenty of technical advice out there, and I haven't met any technicians out there who I don't like. I think they all have great messages because, and I had to say I'm the evangelical about it, but they kind of seen what they want. They've got these values for soil. They actually, they want to look after their soil. Well, like when I go out into Kangaroo Island and I see that massive 200,000 hectare scar on the country, I really well up and my heart really bleeds when I see the damage that's occurred there. And I'm thinking of the damage above the soil and damage below. So when somebody understands with the compassion that needs to go into soil to make them actually grow things for us, to sustain us, like those technicians, they want bottling. They're fantastic. The social support is another thing altogether. I have, particularly in Western Australia, when I've stayed over on a weekend and gone to the footy with a couple of clients, I've seen what they have to deal with. And I think at best it's pretty shabby behaviour. And at worst, I think it's sheer bullying. Is what people can and can't talk about. I call it the footy club test. What they can and can't talk about, or they are ridiculed for doing it is, I think, pretty poor form, to say the least. So you need that support, and that's why it's really good to have networks such as yours that that provide that with it. We do a lot of it at RCS. You do great work at RegenWA, and there are some even smaller land care groups and LLN groups and so forth that people go to for that kind of support, because they are getting almost bullied where they bring it up at other places. So I'm for both, for technical support and for social support.
Yeah, and hopefully we can sort of bring those two together a lot more as well. You showed me this image, and I thought I'd bring it up and then you might be able to explain it to everyone on the webinar. So can everyone see, can you see that, Nick?
Yep. It's out to the east, I think around Coolin, but a friend took that for me on his place. So on the left is a crop in about June that is maybe about July, August, sorry, that was sprayed twice in through the summer to kill out summer weeds. On the left, there was no spray. There was 4 species warm season summer crop, so summer multi-species crop that eventually ran out of moisture, and only about 40% of it germinated. It ran out of moisture and lay down. And I would have to ask again exactly what they were, but I do know that tillage, radish, and vetch were in there, and so that just, it ran out of moisture. And the guy told me that there was a fair old war going on within the family, because some people were looking at it and saying you had 60% failure. 60% of all the seedlings ended up dying. Actually, 100% ended up dying, but 60% never really germinated or died soon after. We try to look at it and say, well, 40% actually lived, but look at the resulting crop that you get the following year, because the microbes stayed alive, because the diversity stayed there, and plants get their nutrition not from their roots so much as the microbes that live around their roots, that deliver the nutrition to the roots and live in symbiosis with the roots. You keep them alive, basically you're keeping a root support system alive through the whole summer. And, I hate to point it out, but there was a terrible storm last week, and there's an awful lot of your soil now in South Australia that came off country. Now, I would make a promise to anyone that comes to the next Grazing for Profit School in Western Australia, I'll promise to bring back some of that soil with me and drop it off. But, I don't mean to be flippant, but it was a pretty sad day, that storm. So to go out and willingly kill off the little bit of cover that we have over summer, I don't think makes as much sense anymore. I think we've got better systems than that nowadays. And I think in 100 years, you won't see that anymore. Hopefully it's a lot sooner than that.
Yeah, hopefully we don't have to see that in the future. I know that the images that I've seen haven't been great, and people have lost lots of soil and all their seed and stuff as well. So hopefully we don't see that as often in the future, but we're all going to make that change now, I suppose. So I suppose we're coming up to 1:30 and finishing up. So there was one last question that someone sent through earlier on. So this person says, I'm interested in buying a soil key renovator from Gippsland, Queensland, Victoria. It seems to give regenerative ag results through a mechanical tillage seeding mechanism. What are your comments? And then he goes on to say, I know the idea of regen ag is minimal disturbance through tillage, but the data is quite astonishing regarding microbial stimulation, carbon sequestration, productive improvements, and therefore regeneration of soil and stimulation of natural systems. Sorry, it's a bit of a mouthful.
I think I got the gist. I like what I see with those, and I've only seen the results. I've not seen one working except on the video of soil key. They make a lot of sense. They can use liquid inject really well, so you can get some good soil drench of biology right on top of the seed where it needs to be. There's some, if any of you haven't looked up Johnson Sioux bioreactor or BEAM, BEAM, making your own compost extract and using that as a seed dressing, I think that and a combination of vermicast, Nutrisoils, all that good stuff is really, really complementary. A lot of that tillage equipment is really good when you use it in combination with liquids and live liquids going down the tube. Just be careful that your soil is ready for it, that you have a physical environment that will grow in it. So make sure you've got oxygen in your soil, make sure you've done the, maybe aeration that needs doing first before it goes in. Otherwise, you waste your money. But they're good machines for sure.
Thanks, Nick. There doesn't seem to be too many other questions that have come through at all. And I know that we're hitting the 1:30 mark and people probably have other things as well to go and do. So I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you once again. I know I always learn a lot from reading your papers and listening to you in these sessions. So we'll make sure that it goes up online again so everyone can go back and listen to it and catch up on little bits that they may have missed out on. But yeah, I'd like to say thank you once again and for everyone for joining us. And I look forward to having that next session with you early next month.
I look forward to it as well. Thanks so much, everyone, for coming.
Yeah, thanks, Nick.
Bye-bye.